Hello Internet, welcome back to Tromsø Twilight. This is the channel where I, Vincent, talk to you, the Abyss, about books, movies, music that I enjoy, find interesting, or a combination of the two. Today it's just a short one about the new movie I Know What You Did Last Summer, 2025. This movie is a reboot slash sequel to the original I Know What You Did Last Summer movies, the first one of which came out in 1997. It was written by the same person who wrote Scream and it was released the year after. I can't remember who directed the original film. The new film is directed by Jennifer Kaytin Robinson, who directed a very kind of slick high school dark comedy a year or two back, which had a cameo from Sarah Michelle Gellar, who's in the original I Know What You Did Last Summer. Uh, and that film I really enjoyed. It was kind of a bit Heathers, a bit 90s. It seems like Jennifer Kaytin Robinson has a kind of developing a style of kind of referring back to 80s and 90s movies. This new film was written by Sam Lansky from a story by Leah McKendrick and the director, Jennifer Robinson. I want to talk about this film because it touches on some of the themes that I think I've been talking a lot about on this channel the last half of a year around kind of nostalgia and art. So the film starts off, it seems like a reboot. It's set in the same town as the original film and I believe also the novel. There are a whole new cast of characters who are quite young. There's a main character, the protagonist is called Ava, and she's played by Chase Sue Wonders, who seems to be like quite talented. Looks like she's maybe going to do well. There's another actress who's kind of them sort of a duo. It's her old best friend called Madeline. She's played by Danica Richards. Now the character of Madeline is kind of like a very entitled, spoiled, but not malicious young woman, kind of reminiscent of characters from films like Clueless from the 90s, or Bodies, Bodies, Bodies more recently, maybe also White Lotus, that kind of character. She, in at the beginning of the film, is engaged to a character called Teddy, who is played by Tyreek Withers. Tyreek Withers, you may have seen in a standalone episode of Atlanta about a biracial boy, which is filmed in black and white. One of my favorite episodes of that season, extremely satirical, and he's really excellent in this film as a kind of sort of a also a rich, entitled guy, kind of a bro, but not a bad person necessarily. The rest of the central cast are played by Jonah Hauer-King, who plays a character called Milo, who's supposed to be a love interest for Ava, but I did not care about this guy. And then maybe the most interesting character, but who gets the least screen time, is a character called Stevie, and she's played by Sarah Pidgeon. Essentially, this film starts the same way as the first film. All of these young people who I just mentioned, they are involved in a car accident where somebody dies, and they don't try to help and they don't report it. A year later, this leads to a series of murders carried out by a murderer dressed in a fisherman's outfit with like a fisherman's hat and a hook. So this, I think, is like an attempt to have this kind of iconic killer outfit, but it's never been as iconic as, Jason or Freddy or the Scream character with the mask and the knife. Now, the first part of this film is really engaging, entertaining in a very sort of light, silly, campy fashion that you would expect from a slasher movie. The tone is kind of both suspense but also comedy. Like there's one guy who gets shot with a harpoon, and I think his response is like, "Bro," or something. Like this is the kind of tone that they're going for in this film. There's kind of references to like yoga, wellness, and all of this kind of thing. Sort of superimposed onto that is this guy going around with a hook, murdering everybody. The film starts to refer back to the original series at about the halfway point or about a third of the way through, and they introduce Jennifer Love Hewitt from the earlier films, and Freddie Prinze Jr. Freddie Prinze Jr. was never the best actor originally in the 90s, and he certainly has not got better. Jennifer Love Hewitt, though, is good as always. At first, it's kind of fun that they start to consciously hark back or like reference the original story, and you realize that this isn't just a reboot, like the same thing is happening in the same town. Um, and the local town have kind of conspired to scrub the story from the internet. Ava meets this character called Tyler Trevino, who has a podcast. She's played by Gabrietta, and she's probably my other favorite character. I would love to see a sequel about this character. I thought that Gabrietta, who I don't know who she is, but I thought that she was like having a great time being super camp. She's researching the original story, and so the two kind of stories begin to overlap in some way. At first, this gave the film some enjoyable depth, but in the second half of the film, they became so concerned with kind of referencing the first film and trying to retell parts of that story. And there was a dream sequence with Sarah Michelle Gellar. Now, as much as I like Sarah Michelle Gellar and I like to see her, the dream sequence went absolutely nowhere. I felt like something happened that has been happening a lot in movies and music recently, which is that because the late 90s and the early 2000s is now an era of nostalgia in the same way that the 60s and 70s were in the 90s, they spend so much time kind of working the nostalgia angle that the film becomes very confused. Like, is this a film for people who are the age of the characters in the film, or is it a film for people who are my age, or is it trying to do both and never really serving either? It doesn't help that they introduce a kind of meta level towards the end of the film, where at one point Jennifer Love Hewitt actually says something like nostalgia sucks, and it's like, okay, it doesn't suck any less in this film because you're lampshading it. Jennifer Kaytin Robinson, I think, is quite a talented director. She hasn't yet done anything very original, and in this film she really fails to kind of decide on a point of view. So she hedges and she tries to do too much, and it kind of undermines what could have been a more enjoyable film. But she is good enough with timing and with tonal shifts and with the kind of like slick aesthetics that this kind of slasher needs, that she carries it off regardless. So I enjoyed the film, but it wasn't great. I guess the original film wasn't great either. So it's kind of a pretty decent addition to the series. What I will say though is that it's like the slashers of the 90s, like Scream and I Know What You Did Last Summer, were already very self-referential, and they were already referring back to the slashers of the 70s and the 80s. And slashers now referring back to films in the 90s, it's like layer upon layer upon layer of referential irony. And at a certain point, that becomes kind of boring. It reminds me of a story that my friend Ben Washington told about the artist Vito Acconci. Ben was talking to him about another artist's art show, and Vito Acconci said, "Is it art about art?" And Ben said, "Yeah." And he said, "I hate it already." And it's a little bit like that. It's like it's cinema about cinema about cinema. It's Russian dolls of referential nostalgia. I could have done without it. I think I would have enjoyed this film more if they'd have done a straight kind of guilt-free reboot, and maybe they would have introduced Jennifer Love Hewitt as a cameo. That is my brief discussion of I Know What You Did Last Summer 2025. If you've seen it, jump in the comments and let me know. Or if you have thoughts about the current wave of 80s, 90s, and early 2000s nostalgia and you'd like to discuss it, also jump in the comments. Otherwise, I hope to see you again.